There's nothing quite like the NBA playoffs. It's where stars make or break their legacies, as each playoff run holds a ton of weight on their reputation around the league. When we form our opinions on NBA players, a good chunk of it comes from multiple seasons of their performance trending in a certain direction. They either gain the reputation of someone who steps up in the brightest moments, or the reputation of a choker who shrinks when their team needs them the most. While it takes time to build a certain narrative, every big-name player has a defining moment that seems to put their reputation in stone. Today, we're going to look at 4 stars who are viewed as choke artists and look at the moments that led to them getting that unfortunate label. The first and most recent player defined as a choke artist is none other than Ben Simmons. Simmons is a 6'10 ball handler, an elite playmaker, and one of the best defenders in the league. On paper, it sounds like any team would love to have him, but these days, that's far from the case. During the 2018 season, Simmons proved himself as a legitimate franchise cornerstone, leading Philly on his 16-game winning streak to end the season, with a good chunk of it coming without Joel Embiid, who was out with an orbital fracture. After breezing through the Heat in round 1, many picked the Sixers to easily beat the shorthanded Celtics and advance to the conference finals. To everyone's surprise, the Celtics upset Philly in 5 games. The major storyline from this series was Ben Simmons, who showed against the Celtics that he struggled to be effective when the game slowed down. During the offseason, clips emerged of Simmons working out his jumper, which had fans salivating at the idea of him with a jump shot. However, this would become an annual process. A video would surface of Simmons working on his jump shot, fans would get excited, and then he would refuse to shoot in games, especially the games that mattered. This brings us to Game 7 against the Hawks in the Eastern Conference semis. Once again, the biggest narrative around this series was Ben Simmons and his lack of aggression. Due to his poor free throw shooting throughout the playoffs, Simmons was reluctant to attack the basket because he didn't want to be put on the line. Because of this, Simmons only had 4 shot attempts in Game 7, finishing with 5 points, 13 assists, and 8 rebounds. The most telling moment of his lack of confidence came late in the fourth quarter, where Simmons spun off Gallinari and passed up an uncontested dunk, dishing it off to avoid potentially going to the free throw line. This was the last straw for Philly fans, who seemed to be fed up with one of their star players shying away from the moment and not progressing over the years. The organization seems to have lost faith in him too, as Doc Rivers publicly said he doesn't know if his team can win the championship with Simmons running point. Undoubtedly a great regular season player, Simmons is likely going to have to prove himself on a new team since Philly is currently looking to trade him because of his playoff woes. Next up is Paul George, who had a completely different narrative around him when he was younger. During his Indiana days, he went toe-to-toe with LeBron in the Heat 3 years in a row, giving them more problems than anybody else in the East during their 4-year run. However, PG's image has soured with the NBA community over the years, which has resulted in his shortcomings being highlighted whenever they occur. And the major reasons fans turned on him were largely self-inflicted. The first reason was because of a Gatorade commercial from 2017 where he made a fictional game winner, calling ball game in the process. This is where the trolling started, as fans looked at the numbers and found out he doesn't have the greatest numbers in clutch situations, unlike what the commercial portrays. But the instance that really put PG under a microscope was declaring himself playoff P before the Thunder faced the Jazz in the 2018 first round.
Y'all ain't met playoff P yet, huh?
A couple weeks later, the Thunder would go on to lose to a Utah team led by rookie Donovan Mitchell in just 6 games. The worst part of this was that Paul George only scored 5 points in the closeout game. From this point, he became a target for NBA fans who would jump at any opportunity to troll playoff P. As bad as that sounds, that still isn't the moment Paul George was labeled as a choke artist. In order to understand the exact moment that made Paul George a choker, it requires some context. Now, I already mentioned the whole disaster of the playoff P nickname and how everything he does in the playoffs is under a microscope. And during the first round against the Mavericks, he was having some major shooting struggles. In games 2 through 4, George shot a combined 10 of 47 from the field, becoming the first player since 1960 to shoot under 25% from the field in 3 straight games. At this point, the internet was trolling him relentlessly, calling him out as a choker every chance they could get. He then had a huge 35-point performance in Game 5 to shut up the doubters, or so he thought. After going up 3-1 against the Nuggets in the next round, the Clippers blew double-digit leads in back-to-back games as Denver forced a Game 7. This is where it all fell apart for Paul George. Both him and Kawhi had awful games, shooting a combined 10 of 38 from the field, but it's PG who has the lasting memory from this game that'll haunt him forever. As the Nuggets pushed their lead all the way to 15 with about 4 minutes left in the fourth, the Clippers got the offensive rebound off a Kawhi missed 3 and swung up the ball to Paul George in the corner, whose 3-point attempt hit off the side of the backboard. This missed shot resulted in an endless amount of memes about his performance, which led to fans creating a new nickname for him, Pandemic P. Despite a stellar 2021 playoff run, Paul George still has an uphill battle if he wants to reverse his reputation as a choker, as fans won't forget the side of the backboard 3 anytime soon. Chris Paul is undoubtedly one of the best point guards to ever play. He's 4th all-time in assists per game at 9.4, has led the league in steals 6 times, and has made a total of 10 All-NBA teams. The major thing that holds Chris Paul back from being put in the upper echelon of all-time great NBA players is his playoff resume. During his prime years, CP3 could never get past the second round, even though his teams were often seen as title contenders. There were upsets, injuries, and even a blown 3-1 lead that kept the Clippers from ever getting deep into the playoffs. But there was one moment in particular that stood out from the rest, and it was Game 5 against the Thunder in the 2014 Western Conference semifinals. With the series tied at 2 games apiece, Chris Paul and the Clippers were in perfect position to steal one on the road, which would give them a crucial 3-2 lead. After a clutch mid-range jumper from CP3, the Clippers were up by 7 with just 49 seconds left. 9 times out of 10, a playoff team that's up by 7 with less than a minute left is going to go on to win the game, no questions asked. Unfortunately for CP3, this was the 10th time. After a timeout, Kevin Durant quickly buried a contested 3 to cut the lead to 4 with 43 seconds to go. Next possession, Jamal Crawford had a mismatch with Kendrick Perkins guarding him, but he couldn't capitalize, missing the layup. This was followed by a long outlet to KD, who made a layup that cut the lead to 2 with 17.8 seconds remaining. Chris Paul then gets the inbound pass and seems to try and draw a foul on Westbrook, who swipes the ball from him clean. Reggie Jackson then came up with the loose ball, attacked the basket, and had it stripped out of his hands. Regardless of whether or not the call was correct, the Thunder were given possession down 2 with 11.3 seconds left. Westbrook got the ball and threw up an awful 3-point attempt, but Chris Paul bailed him out with a foul. This resulted in the Thunder taking a 1-point lead with 6.4 seconds left. With a chance to make up for putting his team in the position they're in, Chris Paul got the ball and didn't really have much of a plan. He came off a screen from Blake Griffin and dribbled it into no man's land, turning it over to end the game. This was an absolutely brutal look for Chris Paul, who had 2 turnovers and a foul in the final minute, causing his team to lose. The Clippers would end up being eliminated by the Thunder on their home floor in Game 6, which really stamped CP3 as a playoff choker. For someone who's had a career full of controversy, excitement, and ultimately disappointment, this moment perfectly defines Paul's career. He was knocking on the door of a championship for years, but always found miraculous ways to lose. Some losses were his fault, some losses were because of others. This moment right here has both on display more than ever. There might not be any player in NBA history that has suffered more for their playoff reputation than James Harden, who is labeled as one of the biggest choke artists of all time. While the Rockets had a series of up and down seasons during Harden's first 4 years in Houston, they didn't emerge as true contenders until 2017, when Mike D'Antoni became the head coach and handed the Beard the keys to the offense. Over the course of the next 4 years, the Rockets consistently found ways to come up short in the playoffs. While there are many fingers to point as to why this happened, it ended up being Harden who was labeled as a choke artist. And the biggest reason for that was Game 6 of the 2017 conference semifinals against the Spurs. After limping into the playoffs as the 8th seed the year prior and losing Dwight Howard in free agency, the Rockets shocked everybody and finished as the 3rd seed in the West. This was pretty much entirely because of James Harden, who had an incredible season, averaging 29 points and 11 assists a game. All of this led up to the conference semifinals against the Spurs. Harden was actually having a pretty good series after 5 games, but then it all fell apart. The Rockets headed back to Houston down 3 games to 2 with a chance to force Game 7. Not only that, but the Spurs were missing both Tony Parker and Kawhi Leonard for Game 6. With those two sidelined, it seemed all but certain that the Rockets would take care of business at home and push the series another game. Unfortunately for Harden and the Rockets, that could not have been further from the truth. Harden ended up having by far the worst performance of his career, posting 10 points, 7 assists, 3 rebounds, and 6 turnovers on just 2 of 11 shooting and a 39-point loss on his home floor. It wasn't even the fact that Parker and Kawhi were out and he lost in Houston. It was the way Harden played. He looked lost from the opening tip and was second-guessing all the moves and decisions that worked out for him all season long. After this game, people everywhere were calling it the worst choke job they've ever seen from a superstar. Harden was getting slandered so bad that his good friend Travis Scott had to call into Stephen A. Smith's radio show to try and defend his name.
The first time, and I need people to really recognize that we are contenders for champions. And people got to understand that this guy formulated a team that thrived through this whole season and playoffs.
From this point on, Harden has continued to have his up and downs in the playoffs, but this moment right here forever cemented him as a choke artist in the eyes of NBA fans forever. Do you guys agree with my list of the biggest chokers? Did I leave anybody off? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.